join me then in welcoming Fasiha Hassan.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. My name is Fasiha Hassan. I think I've had I'm actually humbled by the introduction that I've been given. But I must begin by firstly thanking the mosque for the invite. It has been many months that we've been trying to get me down here. Finally here, and it's an honor. It's an honor to be in such a space that I know was fundamentally part of the anti-apartheid struggle that is iconic for us as a Muslim community, and that really, for me, represents what it means to be a Muslim activist. So thank you for the opportunity to speak in such a historic space, and inshallah we'll have I'm sure, a very robust discussion. But just at the outset, I'm not the vanguard of information. I don't know all the answers. I'm figuring it out as much as anyone else is as we go day by day. So some things we get right, some things we don't. And I'm not trying to dictate a particular narrative, but this is just some of my analysis and some of my thinking, particularly over the last few years. And I must begin by speaking about what it means to be a young person in South Africa, about a young generation who is interrogating all the notions that we were taught, interrogating the idea of what it means to be a so-called born free, the identity politics of what it means to be a young Muslim person of color in a South African society, what is political freedom, what is economic freedom. And all of that led us into a space of the 14th of October 2015, when myself and others woke up in the very early hours of the morning. We sat down on the ground, and with an unfaltering conviction, we didn't move. And we didn't know what Allah had in store for us. We had no idea when we woke up that morning, and the protests that we had planned, and the activism, and really the stand that we were going to take against the university system. We had no idea that it would change the course of history. We had no idea that we would change the narrative of higher education and what it meant to access higher education as a person of color. Nor did we know that we would spark a debate that would reignite the fighting spirit that has been so dormant in young people. You know, when we sat down on those tar roads, all we could think about was that 10.5% increment, and what that increment would mean for the working class and for the black child. We were verbally abused. We were physically abused, threatened, almost driven over, and in some cases, people actually were. But we remained steadfast. And it began with a small group of students, about 20 or 30 in the early morning, but by midday, we had mobilized hundreds, if not close to 1,000 people. And in the upcoming days, other universities had contacted us. By the Monday of the following week, every single institution of higher learning was shut down in this country. And it was then that we realized the power of a mobilized youth to shake the core of an unjust system. But what is that unjust system? Not many people really interrogate what that means. And perhaps we make the assumption that people do know. But higher education as it is structurally racist. It seeks to exclude people of color, and particularly poor people, on every single level. And it's important for us to give examples. It's important for me to justify and contextualize what that means. A student walking in from rural Eastern Cape, who may have overcome the difficulties of basic education, it's an achievement that they're even walking into a WITS or a UCT, now walks into a space where English is their third or their fourth language. They're learning very advanced content in a language that's not their own. They may or may not be funded by the government, which means they may or may not have accommodation. If they don't have accommodation, they're likely to sleep in a library. They're likely to sleep in a toilet. And these are real, lived realities of young people. They may not even have access to textbooks. They spend the night in a computer lab trying to complete an assignment. And when they walk into class, they sit next to their privileged contemporary who has had every opportunity, who's gone to the best school, who's had every tutor, every textbook, everything that was needed for them to succeed. And yet they are expected to be on the same level. Because education as it stands is not about how smart you are. It's not about how hard you work. It's about what's in your pocket, and it's about what you can afford. That commodification of education is what we've been fighting. And Fees Must Fall was led by women. You might have seen this. It doesn't mean that there were not men in the front, but it was majority led by women, particularly young Muslim women. Because we identified our role as Muslim youth in society, that being a Muslim is not just about the ritualistic elements, that in our lived everyday experience, we must push and fight for social justice. And that was the motivation behind many of us getting as involved as we became. And now to tie it into a very Islamic perspective. The Prophet ﷺ was a revolutionary. He was a radical of his time. He challenged the status quo. He swam upstream and he shook the core of an unjust system. If we look at the Battle of Badr, here was a situation in which a very young Muslim community and society had all the odds stacked against them, had the system and the structure stacked against them. You can look at it mathematically, you can look at it in terms of power dynamics, you can look at it in almost every instance. They were destined to lose. And yet they went out, the Prophet ﷺ led them fearlessly and said that they're going to change discourse, they're going to change the history of Islam. And they did. And when we are on the front lines, when the police have their guns armed and they're about to open fire, when they're about to release tear gas and stun grenades, and I'll speak from personal experience. Last year we had formed a human chain in front of one of the Caspers who was attempting to enter into just the space in front of the Great Hall at Wits University. We were doing that because we knew that once they entered, it would just be chaotic, that students would be attacked, that people would be arrested, it would be an absolute mess. And in holding that human chain, I was standing just on half of my body was in front of the Casper and the other half not. But I could see the policeman with his gun ready, pretty much ready to run us over. And it was in that moment that I asked Allah not just for strength, but for something beyond that. Because as a student leader, I knew that I was responsible for thousands of people behind me. I knew that I was responsible, and not just me. We knew as a campaign, as Fees Must Fall, we were responsible for the future of this country. And that had Allah not led us in a particular direction, we would not have, number one, made it out okay. Because, I truly believe in the power of Ayatul Kursi. I know people speak about it and you read about it, but I can tell you I truly believe in it. Because at every moment when I've read it and when I've asked Allah for guidance and for assistance, He's never failed us. And when you are on the front lines, when everything is difficult, when society doesn't understand what you are saying, when you have a grandmother from rural KZN who walks into your office and says, I've come with my granddaughter or my grandson. They haven't applied. They may or may not have the marks, they've come with a bag and the clothing of their back. And I've had grandparents sit in my office and cry because that's all they've got left. That the money that they had to come to Wits was just enough for two people. They can't go back home with their grandson. It's just enough for one person. And what this education means. And the point that I'm making is that we need to draw strength and courage from the Battle of Badr, from when Islam was not easy to practice, when it was at a time in which you were constantly persecuted, when all the odds said no, you said yes, and you fought back. Because we can change the status quo. We can actually realize what we call not just political freedom but economic freedom as well. That we can become a society that can reflect. I'm now cautioning myself to use the word rainbow nation, but we can realize a society that's more equal than it currently is. But we also need to ask ourselves as a Muslim community, are we as involved in greater society as we should be? Because a growing trend, and we must be honest about this, is that we have become very insulated. That we only get involved in projects and campaigns and initiatives that affect us, that affect me, that affect the Muslim community alone. And what that has resulted in is a lack of dawah action. Because when we were at the front lines as young Muslim women, what we showed society is that we can break all the stereotypes. That we don't have to change our identity as Muslim women and Muslim young girls and politics. Because very often there's a notion, and I see particularly when I led the MSA, that living in a Western society we must adopt a Western identity, a Western narrative. And therefore, I'll be religious later. I'll pray my salah later. I'll put on hijab later. I'll defer everything to when I'm not a young person, right? To when I'm not in this space. And part of the difficulty we've had, and part of what we're trying to change, is the intersection of those identities and the fighting back of those notions. But yes, are we as involved as we need to be? And I think the answer is no. And that's something that we need to be very self-reflective on. We need to understand that being a Muslim person, particularly in a society, in a country that's not just Muslim, means that we must get involved in other spaces. And it means we draw people to the fold of Islam through it, through our actions and through our character and through our identity. But I also cannot stand here in the Western Cape and also not speak about the political dynamic and the current political situation. I must speak about Tafelberg. Comrades of the Western Cape have been very involved in this particular initiative about access to affordable housing. And that's not something that we have been vocal enough about. The Western Cape government had a choice: provide much needed affordable housing or further the interests of the private elite. And of course, the latter was chosen yet again. But I also cannot stand here in front of you without speaking about the epoch that we are as in a country. The bitter truth is that we failed our people a long time ago. And I'm speaking as a young person who is a leader of the Progressive Youth Alliance, but is also someone who is terribly concerned about the future of this country. Terribly concerned about not just the political dynamic, but the governance thereof. Because we failed in our growing inability to provide basic needs and basic services to the people. We failed to hold our party accountable. We failed to hold the government accountable. And in doing so, we have allowed the poor working class again to become the victims of this political fight. And we must also talk about collective outrage of society. There's outrage at Cmrm's fall, there's outrage at Ngandla at state capture. But where was the outrage when 34 miners were assassinated and really massacred in Marikana? Where was the outrage when our masses of the people did not have their grants paid and had faced the fact that they would not be able to put food on the table? Where was the outrage when it comes to issues of land redistribution? Selective anger and activism must be called out for what it is. And this further seeks to entrench the juxtaposition of class and race. Why are we not outraged when a young black woman, like I said, from rural Eastern Cape, cannot study because she was born poor and because she was born black? Why are we not only outraged when it's only our economy and our money which is at stake? Because we have become so consumed with lining our pockets, not just as a state, but as a society as a whole, that we have become so self-interested. And so when I hear about this outrage, I want to see everyone at the picket lines of all of these issues. Not just fees must fall, not just about Zuma must fall, not just about the role of the Muslim community, but us actively taking a decision that every day when we wake up, we will draw strength from the Prophet ﷺ and truly effect what it means to be a Muslim. And that's the experience that I've had. That's the difficulty that we've faced. We've chosen the struggle of that free, quality, decolonized education. But it doesn't end there. It's merely the beginning. And what's wonderful about, I think, the audience is that there's a lot of young people. We were a generation that was called apathetic, a generation that was called lost. But that does not have to be the narrative now. And it should be us as young Muslim people who are leading the discussion and who are leading the narrative in society. That is our goal here. And one of the last things I want to reflect on is the need for an intergenerational discussion. The need to learn from our mothers and our fathers and our grandmothers and our grandfathers who took very radical and revolutionary decisions to form part of the anti-apartheid struggle and to actively take part in the dismantling of that monstrous system. Where is that activism now? Where is that energy now? Let us have a discussion, let us pull it together, and let us actually learn from each other. Because I have as much to learn from my parents as my parents do from me. And that's a very difficult notion that the older generation struggles to understand. As young people, we can reach society very quickly. We can trend on Twitter, we can push a discourse, we can push a narrative. But there's a fundamental need for us to link struggles. And if there's one thing that I can leave everyone with today, it's about living Islam, breathing Islam. And we must not get too bogged down in trying to understand, or maybe not trying to understand, but too bogged down in the very particulars of it. You know, often I'll interact with young Muslim people who say the water didn't go between every single toe of mine, so now I don't think my salah was accepted. You've missed the point of what prayer is. You've missed the point of why we are here and of our role in society. So that on the day of judgment you will stand in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and you will say to Him, hopefully, confidently, with whatever you gave me, Allah, I used to better society. I used my privilege, I used whatever I had to materially change the lives of our people. And I say our people because we are South Africans. We are as much a part of society as anyone else. But we need to reclaim that narrative and we need to take a step forward. So I hope I have left people with something to think about. I haven't covered everything I would have wanted to, but I think that we just need to self-reflect. And in that self-reflection, we will be able to hopefully reclaim what I believe it is to live as a Muslim. Exactly. Thank you very much.
For a really inspiring, encompassing talk. It's my privilege to add what I can to this talk, but also to speak in this masjid, which has really been a home to me and has done incredible and is doing incredible work and provide some kind of reprieve from what is quite unbearable in some of the other rest of the Muslim community sometimes. So I want to start off by looking at the higher education crisis and giving a brief map of it and then going into some summary of Fasiha's talk. We know a lot of these things about the higher education crisis in South Africa. One, that across universities you have extreme inequality. So you have UCT, which is able to gain about double the amount of income as a university like Walter Sisulu University, purely because it has a rich alumni, or it can attract corporate investment and that kind of thing. So the higher education sector is characterized by this extreme inequality across universities. Secondly, you have the school system, which in terms of education, we had a talk earlier in the Ramadan about how broken our basic education system is. To the extent where if you look at black and colored learners, only 40% matriculate, compared to white learners who are about 90% matriculate. And of course, this maps very, very well to wealth as well. Thirdly, that even if you do make it through the system, the gates of the university are closed in terms of funding. So we saw in the year prior to protests that broke out in 2015, 31%, a third of students who made the requirements, made into university, was accepted, was rejected simply on the basis of funding. And that was really a lot of the basis of the crisis that broke out. And then fourthly, even when you get into university through the high school system, getting through higher education as a working class learner is very difficult. Your dropout or exclusion rate is around 60%, much higher than anyone else. And this is because you aren't able to afford a laptop or a textbook the same as rich learners can, as Fasiha pointed out. And so when we think about Youth Day, recently we've been thinking about what comes to mind is fees must fall. Is the crisis that's gripping the higher education sector. And the thing that really came out most to me from Fasiha's talk was that as youth and the students in the movements today, we've taken a sense of responsibility that accounts for people in the struggle for free decolonized higher education, but also beyond, into the future generation, asking the hard questions about South Africa. And really one of these hard questions is this deeper question of when you're demanding free decolonized education, you're talking about decommodification as well. And so Fasiha spoke briefly about this as well. It's really talking about how when you commodify education as is today, people have to perform their poverty in order to get into university. And what students are asking is, you shouldn't have to perform your poverty. Whose money is it anyway? But on a deeper level than that, commodification talks to whose interests are our higher education talking to. So there's a quote from recent protest that broke out in Brazil over the last year that really captures the sentiment really well, where this 16-year-old learner says, well, actually, and she was occupying in the protests in Brazil, and she said, well, actually, over the past week of occupations, I've learned more than over my entire high school curriculum. And this is something that's really I've experienced in my university and many others. One thing I want to focus on a little bit and bring out of Fasiha's talk is this need and this growing movement in terms of linking struggles. And when we talk about linking struggles and talk about what's characterized as the youth's demand for free decolonized education, it's about linking the struggles within the higher education sector. So you look at curriculum, the patriarchal culture, the other institutional cultures that exist in our universities, the end outsourcing campaign, which is often ignored, and then also linking struggles into broader society. And one of the really useful things as youth, as movements that we should be doing is learning from each other. So as Fasiha says, learning intergenerationally, but also learning across movements and across time in South Africa. And I want to give a few examples of the kind of movements that are similar that have popped up across the country. And I mean, this thing of learning from struggles is something that comes out of the Quran very strongly. Today I recited some portions of the story of Nabi Ibrahim and Nabi Musa, and every time they come to the people, and the response is قالوا يا أيها الساحر, you sorcerer, and every Nabi gets that. And the point here is that these mistakes and these struggles are repeated across time and across wherever we see it, and that's why we should be learning from each other. So if you look at Brazil, for example, I've given the example of Brazil in that quote. In the 1960s, you had in Ethiopia this massive student uprising that occurred in 1960, where students decided that it wouldn't put their foot down. And similar strategies were employed. And in fact, across all the examples, I give the same strategies were employed of shutdowns and of occupations. And the key lesson here is that in Ethiopia, they were able to really extend the struggle far past higher education into the actual central demand was for land redistribution in the country. And they got various sectors, like the taxi driver sector, to join in and say, hey, can we come together and coordinate our strikes at the same time, so that can we have mass community strikes. This happened in Chile as well in 2011. Canada in the same time, 2012, many other examples. And some of the lessons that we draw from this is one that these movements, the Fees Must Fall movement, really has a lot of power to change society, as Fasiha points out. The power of these movements to really influence society drastically. So in Ethiopia, it resulted in the dictator of the time being toppled. To some degree, similarly in many of the other examples. And secondly, I mean, something to draw hope from is in a lot of these examples, the movements actually took a lot of time to build. So in Ethiopia, you had your first movement coming up in around 1963, and then factionalism arises and it breaks apart. But by 1968, you have unification and a much greater movement coming around. Unification among students and unification across society. And similarly for many other examples. And so, I mean, this is one of the worries that a lot of people have, but we shouldn't be too worried about how much time it's taken or about the mistakes, because mistakes are a natural part of movement building, these things do take time. And this movement building is happening across universities. So one example I want to give is that I've been involved with research of context and models for free decolonized higher education. I brought a few, this is an advertising thing, I brought a few copies. People are very welcome to take. There's a good number of copies over there. Please take it if you have a class, distribute it to anyone else. And this covers really models and context and a number of other things. And we've translated it and we've gone through into unions, we've gone to communities, we've gone to various structures to holding these workshops. And so this work is happening and it needs to continue to happen. And of course we do need this. We need this work because South Africa is in a very bad state. So if you're talking about the responsibility of taking responsibility of the country's future, we must always be cognizant that this future is in the balance at the moment. And not because we have zero growth. There's this obsession that people have that we have that growth is this big crisis that's happening at the moment. In fact, all the evidence from South Africa suggests that growth is bad. Between 1995 and 2000, we had some of our lowest periods of growth, and you had the biggest expansions in electrification and water across communities in South Africa. And then you go to 2000 and 2007, the highest growth in our country, and of course, the poverty rate stayed exactly the same, and all of that growth was captured by the rich in the country. The real problem is about our historic and current redistribution issues. We know that 96% of the country's wealth is held in 10% of the country's hands. And those kind of stats make a mockery of even the crisis that's facing, for example, the US in terms of inequality and the Occupy Wall Street movement that comes about. And so finally, I just want to make a comment about higher education being a microcosm for society. And really, when we talk about learning from struggles, it's about learning from each other and taking responsibility. It's about the fact that in higher education, these same structures of exclusion, of power, exist. So one example is that if you go to so let's even abstract from the fact that people are excluded from university. If you just look at If you go to a week ago, I went to an academic, and this academic was giving this talk on the history of economic thought over the past 100 years in Africa. And he says, oh, well, there was a lull. And I asked, well, what about all the kind of knowledge that comes out of movements, out of various other spaces that are not in the university? And he just dismisses it and says, well, real thought only comes from the university. There's a very elitist kind of idea of where knowledge comes from. And that is replicated in society, not only in terms of whose knowledge do we deem valid, but also, for example, whose work do we deem valid? The cleaner's work is not as valid as the CEO's work, or household work is not as valid as the so-called breadwinner's work. And so these questions of decommodification, of asking deeper questions of society, is really something we should be taking across. We should also be taking it across to the Muslim community, as Fasiha points out. And particularly here, I want to point to the historic legacies of racism within our Muslim community. So you have very strong anti-African black subtle undertones in our very own communities. You have these undertones where you expect people to perform poverty, as has been pointed out in this mosque many times, rather than understanding that this isn't our own wealth. And this has a very good parallel with the tendency of some people in universities to say, no, we should allow for corporate bursaries and for kind of the NSFAS type schemes where you have to prove your poverty in order to enter into these gates of elitist knowledge. And a final example is in this mosque that a lot of us have become very comfortable with things that are very uncomfortable. So for example, the fact that last year on Youth Day I could give the khutbah from the mimbar, and Fasiha as a woman had to give it the pre-khutbah talk. And so these are really lessons that we can draw from each other, intergenerational lessons, intersectoral lessons across society of learning, of asking deeper questions, and most of all, of realizing how bad our country currently is and what needs to be done to improve this, every single one of us. So thanks again to Fasiha for a wonderful talk, and I hope there's good dialogue afterwards.
Thank you very much, Hassan. Thank you for challenging us, and the floor is open for discussion.